If a collection consists in an assemblage of elements, if it's a product of selection and combination, if it's a discourse, therefore, then it can be contrasted with an inventory, by which I mean a haphazard accumulation of items. In this comparison, the principled ordering of the former is contrasted with the randomly based amalgamation of the latter. Surveying the 24 works of art which form the pool from which this exhibition is hypothetically to be curated, on visual evidence alone, it's difficult to discern the principles guiding and informing that initial selection. The media employed are highly diverse, as is the range of art forms: photography, assemblage, painting, electronic technologies, sculpture, and printmaking, amongst others. Recourse to the additional information provided in the checklist reveals little more, except that all these works were made recently, and though this isn't divulged, by drawing on prior knowledge, it's apparent that all the makers are resident in Brooklyn. Otherwise, there seems to be little commonality binding either the artworks or their curators. There are no abiding themes, few stylistic or structural unities, and no shared aesthetics, and no single method of approach. Faced with what appears to be a deliberately sought heterogeneity, a farrago of miscellaneous works, it becomes feasible to treat the initial limited selection not as a collection, but as an inventory, as a list with no underlying unity nor a guiding order. When asked to choose approximately half its members for an exhibition, there are two obvious responses. The first involves reinforcing this apparent diversity by consciously attempting to duplicate its plethora of styles, media, art forms, and thematics. The second, and converse, attempts to introduce a set of determinants that may be either grounded objectively or subjectively. The conventional tools of art historical categorizing include classification by reference to school, medium, genre, geographical region, and chronology. Certain of these tools are already operating here, notably restrictions by chronology. Others, such as reference to the medium employed, wouldn't suffice in themselves to divide the total into two parts. Something more extreme, something more idiosyncratic is called for. Personal taste, subjective preference is obviously one alternative, but much militates against this, not least the fact that these works are to be selected solely on the basis of 35mm slides. The difficulties inherent in reading a work of art from such minimal information vitiate such an attempt. Faced with these imperfect alternatives, the principles or precepts of selection threaten to assume greater significance than what actually is to be chosen. The project risks becoming, in short, a reflection on curatorial methodology. The French theorist Hubert Damisch, in an essay ostensibly devoted to Dubuffet, proposed to investigate his subject via, quote, a detour furnished by a deliberately inadequate metaphor. The metaphor amounts to hardly anything beyond the fact that it incites the reader to challenge it, Damisch concedes, adding that by condemning the arbitrariness and the ambiguity of its terms, concepts, and notions, the viewer will arrive at greater clarity and definition of the instrumentalities. Adapting from Damisch the technique of applying a deliberately inappropriate tool, it may be possible here to shed some tangential light on conventional curatorial methodologies without falling into the trap of proposing indefensible alternatives that are little more than the products of chance or whim. Michel Foucault famously opened his book Les mots et les choses with a list culled from an ancient Chinese encyclopedia quoted by Borges. At roughly the same time, Georges Perec wrote a novel in which the letter E never appears. Far from whimsical, his method, which was based on the construction of a renowned literary figure, a lipogram, employed this formal device as a constraint to stimulate fresh and challenging aesthetic expression. In the names of each of the 11 artists selected here, the letter E appears twice. Whether selection based on this criterion corresponds to the use of an inverted and modified lipogram, whether it approximates Foucault's cryptic list, is questioned for the viewer. Making sense, interpreting, hence shifts to become the prerogative and responsibility of the spectator rather than of the curator. By following the example of Damisch, it's hoped that the filter of a deliberately inadequate methodology or tool, the double E, may offer the means to make the process of curating more overt, more flexible, and more defined.